Hello, my name is Dajuan, and welcome today to Samsung KX, to the gamer training event. I'm joined with a panel of extreme technology and gaming wizards. Let's get to know them.
Hi, I'm Ben. I work for Samsung Europe, and I look after TV and sound device.
My name is Amelia Eve. I'm the Senior Communications Manager and Gaming Expert at Samsung.
My name is Emily, or Queenie. I'm a former professional esports player and current Twitch streamer and full-time content creator.
And I'm Anthony. I look after Samsung Ireland for professional displays and PC monitors.
Amelia, talk to us about gamer training. Why are they here today?
So at Samsung, we have launched a platform called Embrace Your Game. So essentially, Embrace Your Game is targeting all types of gamers, from casual to professional. And what we're trying to do is create a platform where you can hold all different types of content that can upskill people, whether it's from they don't know how to work a particular game or they want to learn how to be better at controls, to equally if they're wanting a career in gaming in the future. So we're working with multiple different types of creators, like Queenie today, and we are hosting something called Gamer Training. And what Gamer Training is essentially is one-to-one sessions where a professional gamer or influencer or creator will be able to essentially help you be a better gamer.
Queenie, as a now a member of the Samsung family and a gamer trainer yourself, what are you looking to get for yourself and bring to the fans?
Well, my main point of joining this and providing my knowledge that I have is to help the new generation of gamers, or even existing gamers that might not know that they wanted to get better at something. I want to bring anybody that might be interested and help them achieve the next level of their gaming, whether that is to just get to know it because you want to play with their kids, or if you're an upcoming esporter that wants to go to the very highest levels. I really want to try and share the knowledge that I've accumulated of my many, many years in this industry and just help them wherever I can. So I'm very, very excited to participate.
And it's great because I think it's also as a gamer yourself, you're almost like an example of little girls that are playing, that they can see somebody like them up here and in the platform.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what I hope to show them, that you can do it.
Yeah, fantastic. In terms of the rig that you use, because obviously the gear that you gamers use is incredibly important, especially as a streamer.
Yeah.
You're going to get a lot of comments of what it is that you have on your desk.
Absolutely.
And core of that is going to be, besides the chair, is going to be the monitors themselves. And talk to me how important this stuff is.
It's absolutely imperative that I have good equipment. Everything from my graphics processing unit, or the GPU in my PCs, all the way up to my monitors that I'm actually playing on. And for me as a streamer as well, I need to have multiple high quality monitors, because when you're a streamer, you're kind of a one-man band production company. So you need to be able to monitor all of your production stuff. You also need to be able to integrate and interact with your chat. And also you need to be able to play the game at a very high level. So things like having a high refresh rate, having a high or very low response time rather, is super, super important for me personally.
Anthony, we were talking about earlier about some of the new models that Samsung's bring to the gaming sector specifically, and I think that Queenie almost had a heart attack when she heard some of the response rates. So tell us about it.
Yes, so Samsung's new monitor, the G9 OLED, from the design aspect, had a gamers first mindset around this. So we've had a lot of worlds first. So for example, let's just address the elephant in the room. This is a massive monitor. This is a 49-inch ultra-wide monitor. It's dual quad HD, so in the simple terms I can put it, it's essentially like having two 27-inch 2560 1440 monitors stitched together, and it has an 1800R curve, so you actually get a really immersive experience. But then obviously, competitive gaming has become massive, so we really have to push spec to the forefront of this, and the spec is phenomenal. So for example, you have a 240 hertz refresh rate, but also an industry-leading 0.003 millisecond response time. So latency will not be an issue.
I think we're going to walk out of the store here with a couple monitors, I think is what we're saying.
I need one of them.
And to be honest, yeah, it's a phenomenal piece. But the other main thing to mention with the G9 is not just is the refresh rate super, super impressive, it also has OLED technology in the display. So with our OLED display paired with the Quantum Processor Pro, you actually get whiter whites, blacker blacks, and you have a near infinite contrast ratio. So this just simply means that when you're gaming, and we've all been there, well, all us gamers have been there, is that when you're in a dark environment, you don't get the kind of the muddled up colors and blacks. You can see your target, your enemy, your ally, whatever, very clearly, and most importantly, you get to play the game as the developer intended you to play and view the game.
And you mentioned that you can, because of the wide view of the game, you're actually seeing contenders before they see you. And that, I hate that aspect. The person who doesn't have that, I'm getting sniped every single second.
So yes, it's been a contentious point amongst the gaming community with PC versus console. I am a hybrid, I do both, but most definitely when you're playing your first-person shooters, or even if you're just simply exploring the world of Warcraft, you can actually see a lot more thanks to having the wider display and the increased field of view. So yeah, it's most definitely an advantage. If I can see somebody like 180 degrees this way easily, and they're only getting that narrow field of view, GG, I win.
So obviously gaming is a wide spectrum of types of people enjoying the game for entertainment, for sports, for all sorts of reasons. But TV is definitely not something that we usually think of immediately when we think of gaming, even though it's the preferred display for consoles. But there's something new to the gaming streaming in TV.
That's right, yeah. So TV really is the centerpiece of the home. More and more people are gathering around the TV for various types of entertainment. We obviously start off with film and sport, but at Samsung over the last couple of years, we've really developed our gaming proposition. So, of course, we start with the hardware, and the things that make a TV, film, movie, sport great is also what's going to make your gaming great as well. So fully immersive experience with the QN90, which is our gaming hero product. We have screen sizes right from 42 to 85 inch. The processor is phenomenal. So in the background, it whirs away checking databases of thousands and thousands and thousands of images and optimizes what you have on your screen at any time, whether it is a film or game. So on top of that, we also immerse you with audio, with Dolby Atmos, and if you have a compatible Samsung soundbar, Q Symphony, which means that the TV speakers and the speakers within the soundbar itself work together. So we start off with some really strong hardware to give you an immersive experience, but we also layer on top of that a huge amount of software. So we have things like Game Bar, which is where you can access all of your gaming settings instantly, so you can check how your gaming rig is performing. We also have a number of gaming-specific features like mini-map zoom, so you can enhance your mini-map and really see where you are on the map.
Wait, is this happen on the TV?
Happens on the TV. You can also actually position it on a separate device.
So you can actually move the mini-map around?
So you can pull your mini-map off the screen and move it to a tablet.
So these are games that are specifically optimized to be streamed over the TV via the software, or is this a console game as well?
These are console games as well as games that can be streamed over the TV. Mentioning console gaming, we have 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, so you can plug multiple next-generation consoles into your TV and enjoy all of the things that come along with that. So variable refresh rates, 4K at 120 Hertz, for example. But uniquely for Samsung, we also have something that we call Gaming Hub. Now, this is available currently in Germany, the UK, Spain, Italy, and France. We're looking at expansion to other European countries, but they have all of the features and functionality that you would find within Gaming Hub available within their Samsung Tizen platforms anyway. Gaming Hub just pulls together all of our gaming streaming services. So we partner with the likes of Xbox, Utomic, Blacknut, Antstream, all present and correct within our TVs, and this goes right the way through our lineup. So you don't even need a console to play games on your TV now. You can simply pick up a controller, connect via Bluetooth, fire up your favorite streaming app, and away you go.
What I like about this is that the TV is at the center, like you said, of the family. And TV feels like a much more communal experience. So when you're playing on TV, whether it's with a console or not, it does feel like it's more of a community thing or family event, as opposed to on a PC when you're a pro gamer, that's your space. I still don't know how you talk to people at the same time as playing with them. That just, for me, baffles me because you need so much focus. And yet, you're really good and talking to people. But I think that that's an advantage. And I think that the software you mentioned is the software capability is being brought to many other platforms. And I think, Anthony, you mentioned the TV as well.
I have indeed. So around the G9 OLED, Samsung have come to the realization that the landscape has changed, people's working habits have changed, and people want more from their monitor than it just being a monitor. And one of the key points in proving that Samsung are addressing this new market, shall we say, is the fact that it actually has its own smart TV system built in. So it actually does also come with the gaming hub, your favorite streaming services. So when you've had a hard day of gaming, you want to kick back and relax, you can simply boot up your favorite streaming service, all from the comfort of the one room, or maybe you're simply looking around a lunch break and want to watch a bit of TV in between. You do have that ability thanks to the onboard system.
As an esport gamer, Amelia, I think it's interesting that the gamer training attempts not just to help you with gaming, but also help you as a career. Like there's also the plethora of choices within the context of gaming. Mm-hmm. Can you speak more about that?
Sure, I think that's one of the main things that we wanted to prioritize when we were handpicking the creators that we were partnering with for this campaign. Queenie being one of them. A lot of the types of gamers and creators that we've partnered with have completely dedicated their entire life and career to gaming. And for example, if you have like my niece who's 12 who absolutely adores gaming, if she wants to grow up and become somebody like Queenie, she would look up to the likes of people like Queenie and want to see how they can get into that when they're older. So I think things like that and having those one-to-one sessions allows people to have that accessibility, to come in and then have that one-to-one session, allowed to upskill, but also to ask these types of questions on how did you do it? How can I do it? What things would you recommend for me? It's more than just an advice service. It's actually helping people change how they perceive gaming. And now it's not just something that you do at home or on your commutes or while you're bored. It's something people dedicate their entire lives to.
And you were talking earlier about like content creators, how you don't necessarily watch them because they're super good at the gaming, but you watch them as personalities. And I think that it affects how many followers you have, is how engaging you are in the game. So is that part of like what you think of when you're training other people?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to kind of meet people where they are and connect with them on a human level more than just as like, okay, I'm really good at the game, just do what I do and you'll be fine. But I think you need to really try and find out what they want from their gaming experience. Do they want to become the best? They might just want some pointers to just have a slightly more enjoyable experience right then, but with no further things. And then just kind of take it from there and just tailor it to each individual experience, because that's the beauty of gaming. It fits any age, any platform, any format, and you can do it in a way that suits you, depending on your time, your abilities, everything. So it's a super accessible form of medium and form of entertainment, and now a form of sport. So it's incredible. I could talk about this forever.
Yeah, of course. That's why you're a live streamer.
Yes, exactly.
And speaking of accessibility, clearly mobile gaming is a massive growing market for the sport and for entertainment. It's not necessarily at the far end of the esports super professional, but it's somewhere in that everybody is very accessible and open to everybody. How is Samsung addressing this channel?
So we are definitely kind of, as we kind of said previously, we're creating our products with gamers in mind. And I think that's something that is a big priority when it comes to Samsung, is we are creating these high quality luxury products that are exactly that. We're delivering what gamers are asking for. So we have our latest S23 range, and prime example, the S23 Ultra has some of the quickest technology in a mobile device to date, such as we did a partnership with Qualcomm on their Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip, which is one of the fastest processors that you can have inside of a mobile device. And that was, again, particularly handpicked for this particular device because we wanted to champion gaming at the forefront.
And that's an interesting aspect of the choice, because usually specs for mobile devices is just about upping your previous version, and you want just the best possible platform for anything. Mm-hmm. But you're saying that there is intention behind what you're picking, not just Completely. For performance.
Completely. One thing that we do, I mean, Ben, you can definitely mirror me. Anytime we're wanting to kind of upgrade any of our products, we always make sure that we are listening to the consumers first. And I think that is a priority. If we're getting feedback on they're wanting certain things changed, we will definitely digest that information and see how we can be better next time. And because obviously a lot within the kind of mobile device space, gaming mobile devices are incredibly fast. And that's something, if we wanted to create a mobile gaming device like the S23 Ultra, we had to make sure that the phone was going to be as quick, so we don't have any, lags. We also make sure that we don't have overheating, and we can make sure that gamers, when they're on the go or if they're wanting to play at home on their mobile device, they have such a great experience.
So Queenie, as you transition into being a live streamer, what changed in your setup? What changed in the way that you engage with consumers or with your fans? And how was that path to get there?
Oh, it was a pretty long journey because it started all the way back when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. It started with very old consoles and playing all the old classics. I mean, you can see on my arm as well, I've enshrined some of the old ones forever on my skin. But it basically went from there, and gaming has been part of my life from the start. So it kind of went from consoles and then upgrading to PC. And my first ever summer job was all for the reason of being able to afford my first PC and my first monitor, which coincidentally was actually a Samsung monitor from, I think, 2009. It was very old. It was meant to be.
You were destined.
And kind of slowly from there, I mean, then I discovered esports and competitive gaming and got more and more into it. And from there, obviously needed higher performing technology in my setup because I realized, well, actually there's a huge advantage in going from 60 hertz up to 144, for example, as the first step. And now we can get all the way up to 240 hertz, which is mind-boggling to me.
Ruined.
Yes. So, improving my technology has been really at the forefront to also improving my skill. So the better I become has been a direct correlation of when I've been able to improve my setup as well. So it's definitely been a long journey of constant improvement. So it's really exciting to see Samsung really innovating in the gaming space as well and really deliver products that are
How important do you find that to be to your fans? Like, how important is tech to your fans? Because obviously a large part of your following and is your charisma, is your personality, is your openness to engage with them. But how important is technology to them?
Oh, I'd say pretty important.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even to just access my live stream, for example, people access from all kinds of devices, from portable devices, mobile devices, watching on TVs, watching on their PCs from anywhere in the world at any time. So yeah, no, absolutely. And I frequently get asked questions, well, what kind of monitor are you using? What kind of PC are you using? All that stuff is super important. And I think it's really important as, for me as well to be transparent of what I'm using, what has worked for me, to give a little bit more of a base for why I'm recommending certain products or why something has worked for me, and really connect it to the thing they see on the screen at the time and connect it to the technology I'm using.
Thank you for joining us at Samsung KX. Visit your local Samsung Experience store to try our latest technology. And head to the Embrace Your Game platform to find out more.